Shakespeare presents the age of young adulthood in the guise of the soldier, but often the uniforms and the battles we prepare for are those of the business place. We march off to work in less than heroic fashion. Nonetheless, we get things done. Along the way, most of what gets done has been shaped by writing. Memos and business reports seem to dictate the daily affairs of state. Of course, reports do not make decisions, but reports usually shape the decisions and the discussions that lead to decisions. And disturbingly, good information poorly presented may be ignored in favor of bad information persuasively expressed. Writing well requires that good information is gathered, and its importance for the audience must be made evident. In addition, especially if it is to affect the reader's behavior or result in some public action, the information must be presented persuasively. Finally, all good writing is persuasive, if only enough to get the reader to finish reading the document in hand. And the more you master the art of persuasion, the more effective your writing will be, whether it be a major report or one of the many mundane notes that fill our days. As a rule, words anticipate action. Soldiers must be called to arm. The Declaration of Independence argued the reasons for breaking with England. Its words had to be words to die for. The words of President Kennedy focused America's commitment to manned flight reaching the moon. From the forming of nations and aiming at the stars to organizing a neighborhood to clean up a city park, the art of persuasion is called upon. Whether the college graduate trying to win a job interview or a salesperson trying to win a sale, the art of persuasion influences the outcome. Not every argument requires equal skill. Obviously, the more important and controversial the issue, the more skillful you will need to be. The writer's triangle, which provides a clear outline of the elements of good writing, also serves to highlight the demands of persuasion. The appeals or different arguments work together, just as do the points of the writer's triangle. As the writer, you must first be aware of your own prejudices, so you can examine the issues accurately or prudently. Moreover, as you develop your arguments, you need to establish your credibility. You need to consider the ethical argument mentioned in the previous lesson. You must also present the subject so that it can be understood. The logic of your proposal will appear weak if it seems based on a faulty or incomplete understanding of the subject. I suspect everyone has been annoyed by listening to others speak passionately about something they obviously didn't understand or something they were unable to explain. In order to construct a convincing argument, the audience must be clearly identified. You must be sensitive to the audience's attitudes in order to know what might cause them to respond positively or negatively to your proposal. Specifically, you need to consider the audience's needs and options. What does the audience want, and why does the audience think the way it does? If you do not address those needs, your argument will likely fall flat. As the audience grows in number and becomes increasingly varied, appealing to it becomes increasingly difficult. Nonetheless, you must search for the best arguments addressing the principal objections of the audience, and while doing so, you must demonstrate your ability to sympathize with your opposition. Finally, the text of the essay demands sensitivity. If you use language inappropriate to the subject, or language that does not sound like your own, you will risk being considered unknowledgeable and insincere. If you use language offensive to your audience, your proposal may simply go unread. Two sample essays by professional writers are presented in this lesson illustrating the art of effective persuasion. In the next lesson, a student essay will be evaluated by applying the critique guide to the elements of persuasion. The two professional essays in this lesson focus your attention on issues that have long been important in American politics: patriotism and volunteerism. Both essays represent views which have won out over their opposition, And though the specific topics they address may have been resolved, at least for now, the essays continue to remind us of important issues in American life, as well as serving to illustrate effective methods of argumentation. The first essay is by Senator Jack Danforth. It appeared in the press after being read on the Senate floor before a vote on a constitutional amendment barring burning of the American flag, an amendment previously supported by Danforth. The essay by Stephen Mueller originally was published in Newsweek. Mueller's essay argued for a government program sponsoring a national youth service. Danforth's speech is the more impassioned presentation because his issue was emotionally charged at the time. A Supreme Court decision had recently been handed down protecting a dissenter's right to burn the flag as a form of political free speech. Speaking against the amendment could make the senator seem unpatriotic. Danforth's challenge was to prove voting against the amendment, protecting the flag from desecration, was indeed a patriotic act. Examining Danforth's speech reveals each of the 7 parts of the classical oration. You can see each of these 7 parts identified on the essay in your course materials. Here, I will only highlight Danforth's use of each of those 7 parts. Danforth's introduction, the exordium, is brief. He attempts to win the attention of the audience and create interest in the subject by admitting he has made a mistake regarding the constitutional amendment being considered. The introduction announces clearly the subject of the speech or essay and moves quickly to Danforth's position. In the next section of his speech, Danforth presents background information, the narratio, explaining how the current situation came to exist. He explains how he came to make what he calls a mistake of the heart. The background information concludes by announcing that there are 3 reasons he has decided that his initial actions regarding the amendment were wrong. Those reasons provide the material of the 3rd section of the speech. In addition to the background information, Danforth further defines the issue for the reader. In the definitions section, the senator further clarifies the issue. He presents 2 practical issues, and one, he says, which is much bigger. He notes the practical matter of antagonizing people who are perhaps best left simply ignored when he raises a legal issue discussing the constitutionality of a statute which had already been passed, but which had not yet been tested in the courts. The definition section moves from the lesser to the more important matters and concludes with the much bigger issue. Danforth reminds the audience that the subject being voted on affects the Bill of Rights, something to be done with great caution, and that caution must be invoked in the Senate because the issue is so emotional. The big reason that Danforth identifies brings him to the 4th section of his classical argument, the proposition itself. Danforth now states clearly what is to be proposed or proven by his argument. Specifically, he wants his readers to realize that the Bill of Rights has never been amended in the history of the country, and that the vote about to be taken is critical. It is not a throwaway vote, in his words. A change should not be made without extremely good reasons. Following the specific proposition, Danforth undertakes his argument's proof, the confirmatio, developing the arguments necessary to justify its proposition. The proof or arguments offered are brief and to the point. Danforth notes 2 points. First, that the flag has been changed many times, but the Bill of Rights has never been changed. Second, he reminds the audience that the courts have ruled that burning a flag is a form of political free speech. Rather than develop his arguments extensively, he defends them primarily as he refutes his opposition. Traditionally, the refutation anticipates the opposition's arguments to the proof. Responding to the best points of his opposition, Danforth actually develops his arguments most fully in this section of his speech. The strategy of his response is interesting in that he identifies himself with his opposition. That is, he would like to side with those who are in favor of the amendment. But the rulings of the Supreme Court and the importance of free political speech prohibit him from doing so. You should note that you can win an argument while sympathizing with your audience. I emphasize this point. Persuasion is not the same thing as defeating or proving another position wrong. In the last part of the argument, in the conclusion, Danforth reaffirms his proposal and calls the audience to action, in this case, to vote against the amendment to the Constitution. The classical pattern of persuasion serves Danforth well, but persuasion need not be so elaborate. The somewhat abbreviated structure of the modern pattern of argumentation can be equally effective. This sort of argument can be examined by studying Stephen Mueller's essay in your course materials. You will find the Newsweek article by Stephen Mueller that article has a calmer tone and is less dramatic than Danforth's speech. Yet Mueller does recognize reasonable and possibly deep-seated objections to his proposal. And following the defense of his proposal, he reassures those who might oppose his plan that what is really needed is imagination to overcome whatever difficulties might appear in its application. Mueller's essay follows the briefer, modern pattern of argumentation. In the introduction, Mueller directs the attention of the audience to the problem which needs attention and states his proposed solution. Mueller describes the problems faced by youth, not knowing what to do with their lives after graduation, and the need American society has for services which are unable or unaffordable due to labor costs. He combines these two issues and proposes the need for a national youth service. Most people, I suspect, would agree with Mueller that the country needs these things done. Mueller immediately recognizes the real concern of opposing views, and he identifies how mandatory service might suggest something like mandatory military service, or worse, something like Hitler's youth movement. He also recognizes the natural fear of a new vast federal bureaucracy, in his words, and new public expenditures. But instead of finding fault with those who might oppose his proposal, Mueller uses opposing views to demonstrate that he has thought his proposal out carefully. In a manner similar to Danforth's strategy, Mueller responds to the opposing views, using them as points around which to present the arguments or proof that his proposal would in fact solve the problems he described in the introduction to his paper. While explaining how his proposal avoids the pitfalls of the opposing positions, Mueller continues to imagine and answer objections to his ideas. By the end of the essay, Mueller has answered his distractors and developed his proposal, providing details of how it could be implemented. In his conclusion, Mueller reaffirms his position, claiming it would provide youth a chance to serve this country and earn job training and/or assistance towards post-secondary education. He reminds the audience there is more self-esteem in earned than in unearned benefits, and tactfully he admits his proposal may be no panacea. Nonetheless, with such obvious benefits, he calls the audience to action, to give his proposal imaginative consideration. It is worth noting that in his final sentence, by not claiming his proposal to be a panacea, and by inviting his audience to use their imagination, he puts himself on their side. In other words, he tells his audience if they want to modify his suggestion, he will listen to them. Mueller is more concerned about the problem than his ego. He wants to solve a problem, not just win an argument. I think that makes his position even more agreeable. Both the modern and classical patterns for organizing arguments are effective. They share several elements worth your careful consideration. The proposal needs to be stated clearly. The objections of the audience need to be recognized and addressed. The proposal needs to be clearly defended without antagonizing or creating unnecessary opposition. And fourth, the conclusion needs to re-emphasize the proposition being put forward. You should note that both essays considered in this lesson appeared in modern journalistic formats, a newspaper and a news magazine. And as a result, the paragraphs tend to be rather short, often consisting of only a few sentences. Journalists tend to present their writing in narrow columns to facilitate fast reading. They do not develop paragraphs along the same pattern used in academic writing. Nonetheless, the pattern and quality of both arguments illustrate the qualities of good persuasion, the qualities you should strive for in your own writing. Finally, the qualities illustrated by the organization or patterns of Danforth and Mueller's essays emphasize the ideas already suggested concerning persuasion. The natural writing that enables you to practice an effective essay provides you also three sorts of argumentation. And both essays identify specific issues and propose specific courses of action. And though both are clearly committed to their proposals, they remain or they maintain control of their emotions. In fact, they use their emotions to make their proposals more effective. You can see the natural virtues expressed in each article. They offer prudent solutions to clearly defined problems. Mueller's proposal is more theoretical. It calls for more deliberation. Appropriately, his argument is more tempered than Danforth's. The boldness or fortitude demonstrated by Danforth's language seems fitting for his opposition to a constitutional amendment to the Bill of Rights, especially since the vote he is opposing is about to take place. Both writers maintain a rational tone and support their arguments in ways that demonstrate they are more interested in arriving at a just resolution of a problem than in simply winning an argument. In addition to being governed by the natural virtues, the essays appeal to their audiences using the three sorts of classical argumentation: the ethical, the emotional, and the logical. Danforth has in fact two audiences. First, he addresses his speech to the members of the United States Senate. However, the speech is also directed to the voting public, who will read his speech in the public record, especially those who were offended by the flag-burning incidents which the Supreme Court chose to tolerate as examples of free speech. Mueller's audience is the general tax-paying public, concerned about public services and the apparent lack of direction experienced by youth graduating from college. Note, his audience is not the young college graduates themselves so much as the larger voting public. Having a clear sense of their audiences, both writers are able to make use of each of the three sorts of classical argumentation. The ethical argument uses the character of the writer to influence the audience. To use the ethical argument effectively, writers must show themselves to be worthy of trust. Demonstrating the natural virtues already described is a good beginning point. The writer can also appeal to his audience by demonstrating he or she possesses the same values as does the audience. Danforth, for example, admits he has made a mistake of the heart. Like his audience, he is a true patriot, which he proves by describing his new, sturdier, and shinier flagpole on which he flies his flag outside his home. Moreover, Danforth notes how he was brought up during the Second World War and learned to revere our flag. One must also note Danforth's use of the plural possessive pronoun our throughout the essay. Danforth includes himself with his audience, those patriotic Americans who love the flag and what it represents. Mueller's article also contains an ethical argument, though not as strongly developed as Senator Danforth's. Mueller attempts to win the reader's trust by identifying himself with his audience, just as Danforth did. He observes that American society needs services that we can afford less and less. Mueller speaks as a taxpayer concerned for America and also for his own taxes. Mueller adopts a calm tone. He asks himself why we cannot ask our young people to volunteer in peacetime to serve America. Mueller expresses concerns for his country, and we respect him for that reason as well. Finally, an audience is more inclined to trust or listen to a voice that is asking us to consider a course of action than ordering us to do something. Mueller is not a fanatic. Of course, some problems are urgent, and at times one may need to make demands, but in any situation the audience is more likely to respond favorably if the writer has attempted to win its trust. Not only do Danforth and Mueller make an ethical argument to establish their credibility, they combine their ethical arguments with their emotional arguments in order to appeal more effectively for the support of their audiences. Senator Danforth clearly appeals to the emotions of his audience. Danforth's image of the flagpole, his memories of pride and sadness at the news of his cousin's death during World War II in northern Italy, and his treatment of the whole issue as a matter of the heart, each of these appeal to the emotions of the audience, reminding the audience of its own patriotic feelings. The reference to flag burning as abhorrent and to the Bill of Rights as the crowning glory of our country are emotionally charged expressions. I think the most effective appeal to the audience's emotions, however, is the statement that our Constitution protects any crackpot who wants to stand on his soapbox and express any oddball point of view that pops into his mind. This statement stirs the emotions of the audience, uniting them against the crackpot, while all the same time encouraging the audience to see itself as superior to such oddball points of view. The audience is united with Danforth by calling the protester an oddball and a crackpot. It should be noted that Danforth never addresses the issue that the protester who burned the flag was concerned with. Rather, Danforth sticks to the specific issue of free speech guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. By appealing to their emotions, Danforth hopes to reinforce the effect of his logical arguments. Mueller also develops an emotional argument in his essay. Sensitive to the reader's emotions, which might suspect forced service to the country as being something like Hitler's youth army, he soothes those emotional fears by emphasizing the voluntary aspect of the idea. Mueller also explains how the plan could provide job training and would enable students to earn economic aid for college education. Aside from the logic of the proposal, job training and earning financial aid appeals to the practical work ethic of the average American taxpayer. A good persuasive essay should also appeal to the reasonable nature of the audience. Writing in the 12th century, John of Salisbury justified the study of rhetoric, arguing that rhetoric is the beautiful and fruitful union between reason and expression. Through harmony, it holds the human community together. In that spirit, Danforth and Mueller do not rely only on their ethical or emotional appeals to persuade their audiences. They also have carefully reasoned arguments. Danforth develops basically two arguments. First, he argues that the Bill of Rights has never been altered though the flag has been altered many times. He reminds the audience that the Bill of Rights is a more significant part of our government than is the flag, which is purely symbolic. In his discussion of the Bill of Rights, Danforth emphasizes the importance of the First Amendment, the right of free speech. He carefully defines free speech, and using the reasoning of the courts, explains how the flag-burning incident was clearly an example of free political expression. Though he doesn't agree with the protesters' burning of the flag, Danforth argues we must preserve his right to express his views, however objectionable. Mueller gives two arguments defending his proposal for a national youth service. He identifies guaranteed job training, and substantial federal assistance towards post-secondary education. In addition to the reasons he gives for his proposal, Mueller further defends his proposal by describing how the proposal might be implemented. He does not go into excessive detail, but he describes the proposal enough to make it seem viable. Mueller uses the viability of his proposal to call for its imaginative consideration. Reviewing Mueller's argument, you can see how one doesn't have to win an argument to be convincing. Admitting his proposal is no panacea, that it is not a solution to all the problems confronting the young who desire higher education but cannot afford it, Mueller avoids being inflammatory. Interestingly, I think, we are inclined to consider his proposal seriously precisely because he is not insistent about its particular features. Both articles presented here are persuasive. Each writer made use of ethical, emotional, and logical arguments in hand with the natural virtues to make their proposal seem desirable. When thinking of persuasion, we often think of great orators giving impassioned speeches to spellbound audiences, or we think of clever speakers who always get in the last word. In fact, our daily lives are filled with occasions that demand the habits of persuasion. We apply for jobs. We make proposals to our employers. We try to correct the problems that confront our communities. Our public lives constantly engage us in making and defending proposals, either great or small. In constructing your persuasive arguments, you need to make use of all three sorts of argument: the ethical, the emotional, and the logical. The age of the soldier in Jaques' speech reminds us how natural it is for our arguments to turn into battles for the bubble reputation. Just as it is natural for the adolescent to become absorbed in the emotions, the young adult often gives in to winning battles for the sake of reputation or fame. But persuasion is not merely about winning arguments and giving impassioned speeches. Indeed, effective persuasion usually begins with the controlling of your passions. The age of the soldier in Jaques' speech should remind us of more than the bubble reputation. The good soldier is virtuous, temperate, courageous, just, and first of all, prudent. Cultivating the habit of prudence, you will select your arguments with care and defend your position intelligently. As you write your persuasive essays proposing some change for your communities, remember the purpose of persuasion is not to win the bubble reputation, but through harmony to hold human communities together.